Hey, welcome back to another video. Real quick intro, we're gonna be covering these text animations, so let's get started. All right, we're gonna start this off with something real nice and real easy, and this is the simple little fold in animation where we kind of have the letters folding on the screen. Okay, this is really easy to do. Here I've got this second text layer without any animation applied. Open the drop down, I'll come over to animate, and we're gonna start with the tracking. Once I've added my tracking, I'm going to go to the tracking amount and I'm going to reduce this until all the layers are kind of on top of each other. Next, I'm going to make sure that my animator one is selected and I'm going to add a scale. The reason why we want to make sure this is selected is that if it's not and we add the scale, we're going to add another animator. And we don't want another animator because we want the scale and the tracking amount to be animated using the same set of keyframes. So we want to add the scale to the existing animator. Now that that's done, I'm going to open up the range selector and I'm going to open up advanced, and now I'm going to go down to the shape. The shape is the key to smooth animations. Right now and by default it's set to square. I want to set it to ramp up. Okay, pause. I want to just take a moment to clarify what I mean by smooth. Now, if you have an animation that has the shape set to square and you animate it, it will look like this. Because when the shape is set to square, it will not move to the next letter until the previous letter is done animating. If I just go through this really slowly, you'll see that the next letter doesn't move until the previous letter is in its final position. And what you end up having is an animation like this. Of course, I've slowed this down to really illustrate that concept. Now, when you change it to ramp up changes the transition between each letter to be a more gradual transition. So instead of waiting for the previous character to move to its final position before it starts animating the next character, it will have a more gradual ramp between letters. And that's how we get this nice smooth animation. So we'll be using this a lot in the next couple of text animators. Now, when we set the shape to ramp up, we're no longer going to use the start and end range selectors to animate our text. We're actually going to use the offset. And I'm going to go to the beginning of where I want my animation to begin, and I'm going to pull the offset all the way to a -100, which is the lowest it can go. I'll set a keyframe there, then I'll go to where I want my animation to end, and I will pull that all the way to +100, which is as far as it can go in the other direction. Now we have to go back to the scale, and I'm going to unlink the scale so that I can change just the horizontal scale to 0 without affecting the vertical scale. Now we're pretty much there. We're folding it in. Now I can play with the ease low and ease high. This is kind of like easing the animations or easing keyframes, and that makes it feel a little smoother. Now you'll notice there's this kind of weird pause in between fold and in, and that's because After Effects is treating the space in between the two words as a letter, and so it's animating that as we move across the word. To change that so that it's real smooth and nice is we'll go to based on, and we'll change that to characters excluding spaces. And now when I play that back, it's nice and smooth because it's now jumping from the D straight to the I instead of treating this space as another character that it needs to animate. And that looks real nice. And that's it. That's a simple, nice, smooth animation. Okay, next we're going to do this little overshoot animation. It's really simple and it's kind of a fun animation. So I'm going to grab my text layer here without any animation. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a scale animator. And just like last time, we're going to go into the advanced settings and we're going to change the shape of the animation to ramp up. Then we're going to make sure that we're at the beginning where our animation begins, add a keyframe, make sure that keyframe is set to -100. Then we're going to go to where we want it to end. And I'm just going to use 1 second just to make things easy on me. We can adjust this later. Then I'll make sure that that keyframe's set to 100. The next thing we're going to do is make sure that this scale is set to 0. Okay, so the scale is set to 0. We'll play that. That looks good. And I'm going to mess with the ease low and ease high. I like my ease low to be set at 80 and my ease high to be set at 30. This isn't an exact science, but you can just kind of play around with what you think looks good. I like this combination for this particular animation. Okay, so now we're done with that. We'll close that, and then I'll select my animator. I'll hit Control D to duplicate it so that we now have another scale animator. And this scale, instead of being at 0, we want it to be a bigger than 100%. That's what's going to give us that overshoot. So I'll do something like 160. Now that we have that, we're going to go to the offset and we're going to move the keyframes for this over about that much. And we'll just preview that to make sure it looks good. Looks good. It's overshooting, and then it's scaling back to 100%. So it's scaling up bigger than 100%, and then it goes back. That's good. Now, if you like this, you could stop here, but I want to give it a little bit more of a jello animation. So again, I'm going to duplicate the animator. So now I have a third animator, and on this scale, I want it to be smaller than 100%. So I'll do something like 80%. And again, I'll grab these offset keyframes and move them over. And I'm always checking my work, and that looks pretty good. You can see how it scales bigger. If you look at the O here, it scales bigger, then smaller, and then it scales to the normal size. That's what's giving that nice jello effect. And again, you could stop here, but I just want to do one more animator. This isn't required, but this is just, you do this according to taste. I want this scale to be bigger than 100% again, but I don't quite want it to scale back up to the same as we had the Animator 2 set to. So I will scale it to about 110% because we want this last scale to be kind of subtle. And again, like before, I'm going to grab my offset keyframes, shift them over, shift my preview, and I just selected my layer and hit U to just bring up all the keyframes. That looks pretty good. Now I want it to be kind of quicker than that. So what I can do is grab all my keyframes, and then holding Alt, I can select the last keyframe and just drag it. And that will adjust the timing of all my keyframes. And that may be a little too fast. So I could just adjust it until it's at where I like it. And I kind of like that. And now you can just make adjustments according to the timing that you want. Okay, so here's another fun animation, and the process of creating this animation is actually very similar to the last one. We're just going to be using a few different text animators. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a scale animator to our text layer, and just like last time, we're going to change this to 0. We're going to open up the advanced settings, change the shape to ramp up, and we're going to change the ease high to 30 and the ease low to 80, and then we're going to keyframe the offset by setting the first keyframe to -100 and the second keyframe to 100. Okay, so we got that animator all set up. Okay, it looks exactly the same as the last one. Now we're going to duplicate this animator, and making sure that it's selected, we're going to add a position animator to it. And once we've added that position animator, we can get rid of that scale animator on the second animator. And with the scale, I'm just going to go about halfway just so I can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to just move the position down. So now if we play that back, it's coming in, and I'm going to grab these offset keyframes and I'm going to move them about 2 frames. Okay. And then the last step is to duplicate that second animator. And again, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to move the position up like that. So it's now curving upwards. And this animator's keyframes, I'm going to offset that. And maybe now that I'm seeing that, I can adjust it and think, okay, that's a little too much of a wave. I just want it to be real subtle like that. So now when I play it back, it comes in nice and smooth. There you go. All right, here's our next animation. And I always felt like this style of animation could be for like a horror film or something like that, where the letters are coming in from being blurred. So here I have my text without any animation. And before we add any text animators on this one, we're going to go to the more options here, and we're going to change this group alignment to be the center of our letters. The group alignment is like the anchor point of the individual layers. So when we mess around with the scale, that's where it's going to scale up from. On all our other ones we've done so far, it's been set to the bottom of our letters, and so they've scaled up from the bottom, but this one we want them to scale from the center. Now that that's done, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a scale, and we're going to add opacity, and we're going to add a blur, and we're going to change the opacity to 0, the scale to 0, and the blur to about 20. We can always go back and adjust the blur later, but that's what we're going to do. do. Now, this is the last time I'm going to show you this technique, but again, we're going to go to the shape, we're going to change it to ramp up, and we're going to change these values here, and we're going to animate the offset. From here on out, I'm just going to skip over this step because you guys get it by now. So now we have it coming on, but in the advanced settings, we also have this randomize order. So now populates it randomly, but maybe we can slow this down a little bit. Maybe it's coming on too fast, and maybe I want that blur to just be a little bit more. And there you go. And if you don't like the way it's randomly coming on, you can always change the random seed to something else so it will come on differently. You can kind of just adjust this until it kind of comes on how you like it. I kind of like that. Boom, there you go. Okay, so for this one, just like last time, we'll start by changing the group alignment to the middle of our letters. And then once we've done that, we'll add a tracking animator and we will spread our letters out until they reach to the edge of the frame. And then making sure we have the animator selected, we're gonna add a scale to that animator and we're gonna change that to 0. Now with this one, we're not gonna change the shape. We're gonna leave the shape as square, but what we are gonna change is we are gonna change this from characters to lines. Now, all we have to do is animate the start. So I'll create my first keyframe at 0%, then I'll go to the end and I will do 100%. And then to ease that motion so it doesn't feel so linear, I will again play with the ease high and ease low. And that's a little quick, so I'll just drag this out. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so the first thing I need to do with this animation is I'm going to grab my ruler here and I'm gonna place a guide right here on the left side of the N. And then I'm going to open up my position property and create a keyframe. Next, I'm going to come over to the animators and add a tracking animator. And then just like our first animation, I'm gonna collapse this until all the letters are on top of each other. Right about there, looks good. Then I'm gonna go to the beginning of my animation and I'm going to create another keyframe with the position. I'll just zoom in here and make sure that if I move this over, you can see that the N is kind of right here. That's where I want to line it up, although you do not have to get this exact. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my animator, make sure that's selected, and add a scale and change that scale to 0. Now I go to my range selector and I'll create a keyframe at 0% on start at the beginning, and then I will go to the end of my animation and create a keyframe for 100%. Now if I watch this back, we have the animation, and then I'll just apply some easing to this and maybe speed it up a little bit, and maybe I'll even go into the graph editor and kind of play around with this animation. And there you go. That's as simple as that. All right, so for our next animation, we have this cool little decoding animation. Now for this one, I already have the animator applied. It's got the offset keyframe, it's got the shape changed to ramp up, and it's got the based on changed to lines. Now the animator we've chosen to use is character offset set to 4. Okay, so now that once you get that all set up, we're gonna actually add an opacity animator. Okay, now that we got our opacity animator, we're going to go to the beginning of our animation and create a keyframe on the start and go about halfway through and change that value up to 100%. Now we're going to go into the advanced and we're going to change the smoothness to 0, and we are going to change the base on to lines to match our other animator. And then we're going to go to our opacity and we're going to change that to 0. If you want the letters to be more scrambled, then all you have to do is come over to the character offset and increase this number to something like 15, and you'll see the effect of doing that. Okay, and now you could take this animation even further by duplicating this second animator. And with that animator selected, let's add a position animator. And I'm gonna delete the opacity on my third animator. And I'm gonna grab these start keyframes and I'm gonna move them to about the middle and maybe compress it a little bit. And then I'm going to move everything down. And if we preview that, I'm actually going to change my offset back to 4 because I like that. Look, feels a little bit more mechanical. There you go. And you can play around with this position animator. Just time it however you want, but that just gives you a nice little mechanical feel to this animation. Okay, for our last animation, we have this little flicker animation. To do this one, we are again going to add an opacity animator. We're going to animate the offset -100 to 100. We're going to do all the steps we did before, and we're going to change the opacity to 0. Now, here's where this one gets different. We are going to change the randomize order on, and we are going to alt click on the random seed and add a wiggle expression. And let's do 50 and 25 to just give it a nice, good flickering effect. And that's all it takes. You can change this default to whatever, and boom, you've got a flickering text. Well, that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching this video. If you found that this video was helpful, consider hitting that like button. It really does help me with the YouTube algorithm and helps get this video to more people who are looking to learn After Effects. If you like this content and you want more, make sure that you are subscribed. And if you do subscribe, make sure that you hit that bell icon so that you're notified when I come out with a new video. Also, if you have any ideas for future tutorials, leave those ideas in the comment section below. And if you have any questions about any of these animations we went over today, you can find me on Instagram and shoot me a DM. I'd be happy to answer your questions. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.